On November 10th, 1775, the Continental Congress would pass a resolution to raise 2 battalions of a Continental Marines. And this is today generally recognized as the birthday of the United States Marine Corps. And per tradition, its birthplace is recognized as Tun Tavern, which was once located along Water Street and Tun Alley in downtown Philadelphia. Now, if you go to that location today, well, there is no Water Street. There is no Tun Alley. You're going to see the giant gaping hole which I-95 runs through. So this is a very interesting retrace in history, as there's nothing to really retrace. But I had to, for the 250th anniversary of the United States of America's founding, I had to do something on the legend of Tun Tavern and the founding of the Marine Corps. Now, even without its association with the Marine Corps, Tun Tavern is one of the most famed watering holes, not just in Philadelphia, but across the United States. And not because it goes back to the very beginnings of Philadelphia. Now, Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn in the late 17th century, and one of the earliest structures to go up in Philadelphia was actually Tun Tavern. It's in operation at least by the 1690s, and it was operated initially by Joshua Carpenter. Joshua Carpenter became a leading master brewer in the colony of Pennsylvania, very well known for his Pennsylvania ale. He and his brother Samuel were key financiers for the establishment of Philadelphia and the rest of the Pennsylvania colony. They operated several brew houses, coffee houses, taverns, stuff like that. The Tun was not the only one, but it was probably the most celebrated. Now, the Tun, of course, was not the only tavern in Philadelphia. I mean, by the time of the American Revolution, there was probably well over 100 different taverns that had sprung up along the Delaware River and on the outskirts of the city. The interesting thing about the Tun is I kind of see it as a bit of a melting pot of different cultures, different societies, different classes you can find in colonial Philadelphia. If you go a few doors down to the City Tavern, which many people associate with a lot of our founding fathers meeting there, that wasn't established until 1774, right on the eve of the American Revolution. And that was a merchant's coffee house. It was very high end. Only the highest of society, your merchants, would have gone in there and enjoyed a pint of something. Then you had more of your simplistic taverns. I don't want to call them dive bars. They weren't like that. You don't want to be a dive bar in Philadelphia. You could get in trouble for that. But it was very basic, very simple offerings. That'd be something better akin to describe Man Full of Trouble, which was established in 1759. Most of its clientele being dock hands, ship hands that were coming off the docks, off the ships that were docking in the Delaware River. And in fact, Man Full of Trouble, the only colonial era tavern still standing in Philadelphia that's original. City Tavern, which is a destination, well, it was for many years when you visit Independence Hall. The place is no longer operated, it's just a static structure. Many people probably have say they've dined at City Tavern. You may have dined at a City Tavern. That's not the original structure. That was reconstructed for the bicentennial of the 1970s. So the Tun I kind of see as this where it's located, right on historic Water Street, which again, no longer exists because of I-95. It's right along the waterfront. So you have people coming in off the ships, off the docks, but you also have some of our upper echelon of Philadelphia society. Taverns were more than just watering holes, though, especially in Revolution era America. They were places where both formal and informal meetings could be hosted. Formal as in courts actually being hosted in some taverns, particularly in frontier locations. Informal, just a bunch of merchants getting together and maybe making some slightly shady backdoor business deals. But I think we've often been told the stories of our founding fathers founding our country in the back of a tavern while drinking. And It's not fully accurate, but there is more truth than fiction to that description. In any case, the Tun Tavern in particular, there's about a half a dozen different institutions that trace their roots to this location. A couple philanthropy groups like the Society of St. Andrews and the Sons and Daughters of St. Patrick, they trace early meetings in the British colonies, later United States of America, in the Tun Tavern. And interestingly enough, just a block or so from where the Tun once stood, there's two monuments devoted to Scottish and Irish immigration of these boats that were coming from Europe, and they were landing in Philadelphia within the Delaware River. You also had the Freemasons. They had a lodge that was meeting regularly inside Tun Tavern. It's rumored that Ben Franklin actually organized companies of militias at the start of the French and Indian War out of the Tun Tavern. And even the U.S. Navy has a tie to the Tun Tavern. There was what was eventually be known as the Marine Committee, congressmen. They were meeting there in October of 1775, debating how they were going to fund their new Continental Navy, and probably also popping the question of, so how do we get Marines on these ships? Because our initial institution of the Continental Navy, there were no parameters for how the Marines would be recruited. That's why on November 10th, they had to pass an additional resolution for 2 battalions of Continental Marines. I also want to mention there's another reason why there was a final impetus to raise a separate branch for the Continental Marines. In the fall of 1775, Continental Congress received pleas for help from a council of safety located in a small town up in British Canada, requesting their assistance. They wanted to join this revolutionary movement. So there was this whole plan. There was going to be a whole Marine battalion sent up to liberate this community. Never happened. So by the time November 10th rolls around, the Marines were going to be recruited for very different reasons. Initially, Congress was hoping that they can pull from the existing Continental Army to make these 2 Marine battalions. But George Washington reminded President of the Continental Congress, John Hancock, pretty quickly and bluntly that I can barely keep my army together. I don't know if they're going to last the whole winter. You think I'm going to be able to convince these guys to join battalions that are signing on for the duration of a war? Yeah, it ain't going to happen. You're going to have to look somewhere else. Congress would instead turn to Samuel Nicholas, an individual in his early 30s who came from an affluent Quaker family and thus far had been relatively untouched by the American Revolution. We don't know of any prior military service from young Mr. Nicholas, but we do know what he was associated with. He was associated with the Gloucester Fox Hunting Club, one of the most prestigious hunting groups in the Philadelphia area. In fact, many of those members went off and founded the Light Horse of the city of Philadelphia in 1774, on the eve of the Revolutionary War. So, makes sense that they would appoint Mr. Nicholas, as he's a young man with a lot of connections. He definitely gives me this aura that he's that son of aristocrat. Honestly, when I picture Samuel Nicholas, I don't picture his actual portraits. I picture Michael Caine playing Bromhead in Zulu. Yeah, I'm going to go on a side tangent about Zulu for no reason. If you've watched that movie, you've probably heard many people say that Caine's depiction of Bromhead is not very accurate. I would agree, and I also joke because I think he would have been better as playing Nicholas, as the son of an aristocrat. Nicholas, regardless, was appointed as captain in the Marine battalions. He would eventually go on to reach the rank of major before the war was over. But in early December 1775, he's a captain, and as the legend goes, he is going to go to a close friend of his, Robert Mullen, who is the proprietor of the Tun Tavern at this point, and essentially is going to entrust Mullen as being the informal recruiter for the Continental Marines. And this is where things get a little vague, at least in recorded information I can find. I think the legend has you believe that on November 10th, Congress is going to raise these 2 battalions, and then at the same time, they're going to hand these blank enlistment papers to young Mr. Nicholas, and then Mr. Nicholas is going to walk down the street to Tun Tavern, shake hands with his buddy, Mr. Mullen, and say, hey, we got to raise 2 battalions before tonight's over. Let's serve some beers, and let's get as many guys together. And then by November 11th, they have 2 battalions raised, march right on the boats, and the rest is history. Yeah, it was a much longer process. What I know for certain is Robert Mullen was indeed the proprietor of the Tun Tavern, at least by summer of 1775. The Mullen family, though, had ownership over the property for most of the mid-18th century. At one point, it was promoted as Peg Mullen's Beefsteak Club. They were serving great beefsteak. Everybody had to go down to the Tun to try Mrs. Mullen's lovely beefsteak. We also know that Robert Mullen would eventually be commissioned as a captain in the Continental Marines, but that commission is not dated until June of 1776. Not saying he didn't have a prior rank. After all, we know Mr. Nicholas was very active in recruiting Marines before he received his major's commission in June of 1776 as well. We also know that two of Mullen's brothers were recruited into the Marines by 1776, and they acted as drummers, going around the streets of Philadelphia with a rattlesnake painted drum to literally drum up attention for people to come to the recruiting drives, which we only presume can be hosted at Mr. Mullen's Tavern, the Tun. Now, beyond these connections with Mullen and the Continental Marines, I can't find really any good descriptions of recruiting happening at the Tun, like a good visual of what it would have been like beyond, his brothers running around with drums to draw people in. It makes sense. You're not going to find any big write-ups in the Pennsylvania Gazette at this time because, hey, we haven't fully declared independence yet. Joining the Continental Marines is a traitorous act, although the Pennsylvania Gazette was pretty already supportive of the Patriot cause at this point. So I can understand why the recruiting is probably being kept on the down low. That being said, I've found several sources claim that only the recruiting was happening at Tun Tavern. Any official meetings with the officers, like with Nicholas and Mullen, were not actually being hosted at the tavern, but at the nearby Conestoga Wagon Tavern. Why is that? Well, we know at one point in time, Samuel Nicholas was the proprietor of the Conestoga Wagon. This is where it gets tricky. I poured through the Pennsylvania Gazettes trying to find any news clippings that would show when Mr. Nicholas was the proprietor there. The earliest I can find is 1783, at the very tail end, essentially at the end of the American Revolution. And many people also claim that the reason Nicholas became the proprietor of the Conestoga Wagon is because he inherited in the dowry of his wife, which was Mary Jenkins. I have not found the Jenkins name associated with the Conestoga Wagon. I did find a Mary Jenkins listed as an innkeeper in the early 1770s, but that may be the mother of this Mary Jenkins that married Samuel Nicholas. It's also worth noting, as I've been trying to pinpoint Samuel Nicholas's life, I've been trying to find when he was married. Every resource I've gone through gives me something different. Some say he married Mary Jenkins as early as 1766. Others say he married her as late as 1778. So if he married her before the Revolution, then I'm inclined to believe what some say, that the recruiting was at the Tun, and then formal meetings were at the Conestoga, so they could be a bit more private. But if they married later, then I'm starting to doubt that the Conestoga had any involvement with the raising of the Marine Corps, which makes me believe more in the legend of the Tun Tavern. If somebody in the comments, or better, if you have a photocopy of some primary source that gives me the exact date of marriage between Samuel Nicholas and Mary Jenkins, email it to me. I need to know, because I feel it'll help explain to me how much validity there is to the legend of the Tun. I don't want to dispute the Marine Corps. I'm scared to dispute the Marine Corps. But if Samuel Nicholas is a proprietor of a tavern and he has it before the Revolution, why is he going to Mullen? The argument often is, well, he was trying to be covert in recruiting because he was a Quaker. He didn't want to be excommunicated. They were going to find out eventually. And in fact, according to the Arch Street Meeting House, that's exactly what happened in July of 1776. He is excommunicated from the meeting house. Or maybe I should just keep calm, stop questioning the legends of the Marine Corps. I should just trust the Marines. That's probably safe. Considering their record for the past 250 years, maybe I should just trust the Marines and just accept Tun Tavern as my personal savior or something. Regardless of where the recruiting was hosted, be it the Tun or the Conestoga, there's no disputing, yes, the Continental Marines were recruited out of a bar. And the reason I know this is for certain is because of a particular complaint that one of their future captors would make about them. In any case, throughout December of 1775 into January, Samuel Nicholas would be successful in raising about 5 companies of Marines, about 50 men a company, and each company was to be attached to one of the first 5 warships in the Continental Navy. And in January of 1776, the Marines and the Navy would partner up for their first major expedition. Where? The Bahamas. No, I'm not making it up. They're actually going to the Bahamas. The Marine Committee of the Congress, they didn't know about that. See, Essex Hopkins, who was the commodore of this first fleet, he was tasked with going down to Virginia waters and trying to chase out any British warships in the region. But he was given enough leeway that if he needed to change direction, he may. And boy, he had a better direction in mind. He felt it made more sense not to disrupt British trade in Virginia waters, not Carolinian waters, but to go all the way to Nassau in the Bahamas, where the British had an outpost down there, and they actually were hoarding gunpowder and an assortment of other ordnance. A lot of the stuff had actually been gunpowder taken from Virginia stores by the British when they evacuated Williamsburg and then stashed away down in the Bahamas. Because surely these colonists rebellion, they have no logistics capable of reaching us down there. Well, they never heard of the United States Marine Corps, or the U.S. Navy for that matter. Well, they never heard about it because they were telling Continental. Anyways, thus in March of 1776, Hopkins would stage his small fleet off the coast of Nassau, land about 200 of Nicholas's Marines on the shores, and what followed was a surprising Continental victory in the early stages of the Revolution. Here's some more information on the first amphibious operation of the Continental Navy and the Marines. Landing on the island of New Providence began around 9 in the morning on March 3rd, 1776. Nicholas made landfall approximately 6 miles east of Nassau. Although receiving several alarms about the American force, Royal Governor Montford Brown did not put up a significant defense. He had approximately 300 militiamen to draw upon in the local population, but was unsuccessful in organizing them in time. The rapid advance of the Marines compelled Brown to abandon his first fortress. A delay in movement to rest the Marines allowed Brown time to smuggle most of the island's gunpowder away at night. Commodore Hopkins would later be criticized for not moving his fleet closer to Nassau to block British ships. But when Nicholas arrived in Nassau the following morning, its fort and governor's house were taken without firing a shot. While only capturing 24 barrels of gunpowder, the Marines were successful in securing 88 cannons and 15 mortars with corresponding shells, an impressive capture of enemy artillery. But Brown's greatest loss was the Marines' greatest gain, that being all the wine and liquor he had kept personally stashed. This is being the quote I was mentioning about earlier, showing that, yes, these guys were definitely recruited from a bar. Samuel Nicholas's combat experience was relatively brief in the Continental Marines. Following the Nassau raid, he was largely confined to Philadelphia for recruiting efforts. They were entrusting Nicholas to drum up more recruits, very likely going to the Tun Tavern or other recruiting offices, and then getting some of their basic training. It's clear that he wanted to be attached once again to a field command. He had appealed at one point to Congress to put him in charge of a Marine detachment to a brand new frigate being built, the America. But when it turned out the America was being sent to France as a gift for their services to the U.S. in the war, that quickly ended Nicholas's hopes of ever getting another field command in the Revolution. He would ultimately settle down, become proprietor of the Conestoga wagon. We mentioned he had married Mary Jenkins, ended up having several children with her, and he lived until August of 1790. When he died, he was actually interred on the grounds of the Arch Street Meeting House, which is very interesting because I can't find much evidence that he had fully reconciled with his meeting house. It's very likely he was interred there not because of any personal reconciliation, but rather because of the high standards that his father, his mother, and previous descendants had with this meeting house. As for the Tun Tavern itself, it was not long for this world either. Actually, it disappeared before Nicholas passed away. It was destroyed in a fire in 1781. The Continental Marines were initially disassociated at the end of the American Revolution. It wasn't until 1798 that President Adams reinstated a United States Marine Corps, which has been around ever since, although there were a few modifications to its organization in the early 19th century. At one point, the Marine Corps was almost going to be completely cut again, believe it or not, right after the Great War. It was efforts by John A. Lejeune, who was Commandant of the Marine Corps in the early 1920s. He and his staff really campaigned hard to convince the Harding administration not to cut funding. In those efforts included recognizing November 10th as a holiday in honor of the founding of the Marine Corps. So it's Commandant Lejeune who is the real reason why we have November 10th stuck in our heads, at least us military history buffs. And I'd also argue it's his declaration and promotion of Marine Corps history why Tun Tavern became so closely associated with November 10th, 1775. Oh, also, Commandant Lejeune also came up with this little idea of having giant mock battles on Civil War battlefields for the public to come out and see, just to see how powerful the Marine Corps was. We did a video all about those maneuvers at Gettysburg in 1922, so be sure to check out that episode of Retracing History if you're into Marine Corps history. Samuel Nicholas has retroactively been recognized by many as the first commandant of the Marine Corps, though keep in mind he had only reached the rank of major before he retired from services. That being said, there's been efforts for decades by the Marine Corps to try to monumentize Nicholas in some manner. They know he's interred on the grounds of the Arch Street Meeting House, the current structure of which was built back in 1805. But multiple efforts to try to put a monument were politely turned down by the meeting house. Massive ornamentation of graves is not common among the Quakers. It would not be until 2012 that a small headstone was erected. And really, it's more of a centograph than a true headstone, simply bearing Samuel Nicholas's name and his date of birth and date of death. And every year, the Marine Corps hosts a small service without any firearms. It's just them going into the meeting grounds for a somber salute to what's generally recognized as the founder of the United States Marine Corps. Before we wrap up, this would not be a proper salute to Tun Tavern or the United States Marine Corps without enjoying a few brews. Myself and a humble collector made our first stop at the Liberty Beer Garden, which is said to be the very first beer garden located within a national park site. That's right, you could have a pint while standing on the reconstructed Independence Mall in front of Independence Hall. Or do the more noble thing and have one on Ben Franklin and all of his final neighbors at the nearby Christ Church graveyard. I believe we had Hales Lagers, which was rich in flavor. After running the gauntlet, that is, walking the streets of Philadelphia at dusk, we made our way to the Manful Trouble. It stands just 2 city blocks from the site of Tun Tavern, and as previously mentioned, is the only tavern predating the Revolution still standing in the city. The brews are presently provided by Succession Fermentory. All I can say is if you're in the crowd of adding exotic fruity flavors to your alcohol, this is a place you'll like their selection from. Thus concludes this edition of Retracing History, where we explored the legendary origins of the United States Marine Corps during the Revolutionary War. Enjoy this video, be sure to hit the like button down below. If you want to follow us on future adventures, consider subscribing here to the channel, Readout Productions. If you want to go the extra mile, keeping us caffeinated, keeping me awake every morning so I have the energy to sit down and record these videos, you can give us a small donation for our Ko-fi page. You can even join our membership program through there, the Garrison. Ko-fi page, links in the description below. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time.